If you're a resin artist or a woodworker who works with resin, you're going to want to watch this short video. Hi, I'm Sean from Crafted Elements, and this is our line of maker molds. We have two distinct lines here at Crafted Elements, which we've been selling since 2019. We have our silicone mold, which are industrial strength, production grade, very large, very thick, and very durable molds for making charcuterie boards, small tabletops, and other resin art. We also have our newer line of formed and injection molded polyethylene molds, which are made of HDPE and LDPE. And these are really cool because they are one-piece molds that are formed over an iron form. They are never going to leak, and they are slightly flexible, which actually gives them an advantage to be able to demold your product or your finished piece quickly. So which mold would you choose? Well, let's talk about the advantages. First of all, both these are one-piece molds, so you're never going to have any leaking. You don't have to worry about tuck tape, extra silicone beads, anything like that. Over the HDPE molds in the market, where you can have leaking, you've got all these contraptions to deal with, maybe screws to put in. These are definitely a huge time saver, particularly if you're doing multiple pours a week. If you're a low capacity artist or you're doing this as a hobby, you might not want to invest in these. They're certainly not cheap, but the wooden tuck tape method could always work for you. But clearly, if you have been making resin art or charcuterie boards or small tabletops for any period of time, you could probably see the advantage of these right away. Now, there was also welded HDPE molds in the market, which we sold for a short period of time. And I think these are really cool because you don't have to worry about any weld seams coming out in your resin or your pour. These are perfectly molded one piece. They have a 1/8 to a 1/4 inch radius in the corners and all around. If you look at some of the welded molds in the market, you'll see they are kind of welded by hand, and they can be a little rough, which clearly comes out in your resin. I still think they're good molds, but these are just as good, if not better. So what you're really here for today is to see what's going to save you time. These are going to save you time, money, increase your production capacity, and just make your life generally better. I've pre-cut a piece of wormy maple for this mold and silver maple for this mold. You'll notice this is thinner, just because that's the stock I had. They will both accept, 1.5, 2 inch thick pieces of wood all day long. Now, the one key I want to mention here between these two lines of mold, if you are a resin artist and you're not going to be using, wood, you're not going to be wanting to plane or trim, or basically if you want to just pour your resin, do your artwork, take it out and sell that piece or use that piece, the silicone molds are definitely superior. They have a nicer finish, they're perfectly smooth on the inside, very small radius on the edges and corners. Whereas with these, which are the formed and injection molded or formed plastic molds, they are imperfect, and I mean that by imperfect in comparison to the silicone molds. Obviously, they're still flat bottoms, flat sides, but they're slightly like an orange peel type texture on here. You can't see it in the video, but your resin is going to be a little bit of an orange peel effect. So you're definitely going to want to plane the bottom and top of your piece, and trim off the radius corners before you actually go on to preparing your piece. So if you're a resin artist and you want the quickest, product with little finishing, totally get the silicone molds. If you're going to be using this with wood anyway, wood and resin, you can kind of go with either one that fits your budget and the size you need. So one thing I want to caution is with these silicone molds, you can certainly use them without a mold release, but I definitely recommend using them with a mold release. We've sold hundreds of these molds, but I've certainly had reports of people pouring their piece and then having maybe a partially set part of the epoxy bond to the inside of the silicone mold, and then when they take their piece out, they'll end up with a small divot or tear on the inside of the mold. Mold's still usable, it's not going to leak, but you certainly don't want that, especially with the cost of these things. So it's totally recommended to kind of invest in some silicone or epoxy mold release spray. You can get this stuff from Amazon for $10 to $15 a can, and it goes a long way. You could probably do 40 charcuterie boards with this one can alone, and it's pretty simple. Now, you should wear a mask while you're doing this. Obviously, I can't for the purpose of this video, but you're really just gonna do a quick coat on the inside of your silicone mold. You can actually use this stuff for the polyethylene molds as well. It'll actually make demolding even easier because you'll see when we go to the next sequence of this video where I'm demolding these. The silicone molds is a breeze, it takes seconds, whereas these takes a little bit of work. You need to work the sides, work the bottom to get your piece out. So again, you can use that silicone spray with either molds, but we definitely want to use them with the silicone molds. So I've pre-cut some pieces of maple, as I said, and you can see they're just going to fit right in there. I've pre-mixed some resin because this is not a video about resin. This is a video about time-saving molds. And then you're ready to pour. Now, before you're going to pour, you're probably looking at these and saying, well, how are you going to hold this wood down? There's no built-in clamping system. That's certainly you know, kind of a disadvantage of these molds, but I don't think it's a big one because there's many, many ways you can easily take care of this. What we do here in the shop is we'll use scrap pieces of HDPE. We'll put them on the wood, and then we use kettlebells or small hand weights, and that does a sufficient job. Those pieces of wood aren't going to move, they're not going to rise with the buoyancy of the resin underneath the wood. The other option is if you wanted to move this to the side of your tabletop like so, you can use a clamp and just kind of go like this and clamp it down like so. So the fact that there's no built-in clamping system I don't really think is a big deal. There are definitely ways around it, especially if you're a maker. You're probably pretty creative as it is. This is the safest and easiest way I've been doing it, and typically most of our customers do it as well. Now, without further ado, let's get a close-up of the pour, and then we'll go to the demold. Okay, here we go with our pour. This is a slow cure epoxy. It'll take 2 to 3 days to fully cure, and obviously we'd use this stuff because in particular, this is a very thick piece, so we'd need a slow cure, otherwise the epoxy would bubble up. So pouring epoxy is probably nothing that you're unfamiliar with, but as you can see, using these molds is definitely a huge time saver. You don't have to worry about sealing them, you don't have to worry about tuck tape or hardware or clamping, rather clamping of the internal mold, I mean. So we'll let the epoxy set over the next couple of days, and we'll come back and you can see just how much time you're going to save demolding these. Okay, our epoxy is fully set, so it's time for demolding, and this is where we're going to see these molds are really going to save you some time. So we're going to remove our weights and our clamps, our HDPE spacers. We'll start with the silicone one first. It's the easiest one because these bend really, really easily. And you're going to hear like a sound as the silicone and wood detach from the, rather the resin and wood detach from the silicone mold. And there you go. Pretty much left clean, ready to use again. And I'm going to do this other one that I made off video, rectangular mold, a rectangular board. And same thing, we're just going to peel the mold back, hear that sound, and there's another one. As you can see, that was really, really easy. These silicone molds make that demolding process ridiculously easy. Polyethylene ones aren't hard either. One thing I want to mention is some of the molds in the market, the welded and the multi-piece HDPE molds, they're thick. And normally in woodworking, and you know, you're talking about quality materials, thicker is better, bigger is better, yada, yada, yada. And normally that's true. But when it comes to these molds, the thin wall is what actually makes them functional. This thin wall allows these sides to be completely straight and not tapered, like some of the molds in the market, because they are flexible. So you can literally use your fingers to go around and detach the resin from the edge of the mold. If you're having a little bit of trouble doing that, you can use this method, which is just going around and tapping it with a rubber mallet. But normally you can just turn this over and hit it. And there you go. It's out. Clean polyethylene mold, ready to use again. And all three of these pieces we can continue to trim, plane, and finish and get ready for sale. The key takeaways from this video are that these one-piece sealed molds are going to save you both time and money and pay for themselves in literally just a handful of pours. If you're using these for epoxy resin-only art without wood, I definitely recommend the silicone molds over the polyethylene ones. You're going to get the cleanest piece right out of the gate that requires little to no finishing. If you're creating wood and resin pieces like charcuterie boards and small tabletops and things like that, either mold will work, but just know that the form polyethylene molds are going to require a little bit more planing, trimming, and finishing. A mold release spray, as I had mentioned earlier in the video, is required or at least recommended for the silicone molds. It's going to increase the longevity of the mold and prevent possible tear out. But to be honest, in the last couple of years when I've been using these molds, I rarely use a spray, never had a problem, but it's certainly possible, so that's why we recommend the spray. You can use this spray as well for these polyethylene molds. It's definitely not required with the polyethylene molds, but it's going to make the demolding process that much easier. We have many common shapes and sizes used by makers just like you available. To get a complete list and to order your own molds, simply visit craftedelements.com and click on the molds link at the top. I hope you enjoyed this video and can see how beneficial these molds can be. Make sure you follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Crafted Elements Co. to stay up to date on all of our new product releases. Happy making!